All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Inside Writing. This show, as a reminder, is presented by Gotham Writers Workshop, offering writing classes of all types and sizes. You can visit us at gothamwriters.com for more information. Moving into the show for today, a reminder that at any point you can submit your questions for the Q&A portion in the second half of the show. There's that Q&A button down on your Zoom dashboard. You can submit your questions there. The sooner you get them in, the better. Don't wait till the end to get them in, because the earlier we see the questions, the sooner we will go to Q&A. Let's talk about, let's get into the show for today. We're going to be talking about article writing. We're going to start where we always do, with a quote, this one from Tom Stoppard, who said, "I still believe that if your aim is to change the world, journalism is a more immediate short-term weapon." We're going to talk more about that later. Now let's meet our panelists. Our first panelist, a writer featured in such places as Business Insider, Angie Chatman. Hello, Angie.
Hi, Josh. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for being here. And our second panelist, deputy editor of Hello Giggles, Rachel Simon. Hello, Rachel.
Hello. Happy to be here.
All right. So we're going to jump right into the questions. We always start our episodes with definitions, and article is a bit tough since it incorporates such a broad range. But I want to hear from both of you what the term article means to you. Rachel, let's start with you. What is an article in the simplest terms?
I would say in absolute simplest terms, an article is just a piece of writing where the writer has the intent of, or the writer feels that they need to share something with the reader.
I like that. Angie, what about you?
Yeah, and I'd add to that what I'm sharing is something that I feel like they need to know.
Okay. And so as mentioned, article, it's a pretty broad term. So Angie, when it comes to your articles, what category would you say you write into? Feature articles? Is it opinion? What would you categorize them as?
I categorize them according to who pays me. So I've written features, which are longer and require a lot more research. But I've written the short pieces, and those are closer on the scale to personal essays, because I definitely put some of myself in the article, because I feel like for the reader to learn something, then I need to share what I've learned as well about a topic. So yeah, I think that's the gamut. And then there's, your classic journalistic research, keep the I out of it, which I don't do much of because I find that really hard and boring.
I like it. And Rachel, for you, because you do writing as well as your editing, so how would you categorize the articles that Hello Giggles looks for, and then the ones that you write as well?
So for stuff that Hello Giggles looks for, I would say it's a mix. It's definitely Hello Giggles. We publish a lot of personal essays, a lot of features that are either trend pieces, or they could be roundups of products, or I tried stories, talking about different experiences. We also do just some straight news pieces that are, or by news, I mean, not just political news, but entertainment as well. We do a lot of that coverage. So Hello Giggles is a definite mix. And in my personal writing, I would say probably honestly exactly the same, where I really love to do a little bit of everything. I do personal essays. I do a lot of features. I really love doing trend pieces. I love doing celebrity profiles. That's something that I have had a lot of experience and I'm really passionate about. I've done op-eds. I've done reviews. I like doing a little, mixing it up, and been interested.
All right. So I want to talk about the process of actually writing an article now. I thought, what better way to do this than start at the very top with the title. So there's a lot to be made of a good article title. I have a background in sports writing. I used to always tell my writers, never underestimate how important that title is. So Rachel, how important for you, both as in when you see submissions come in, how important is it to see a title that's catchy? Is that something you look for right away?
It definitely helps to see that, but it's not essential. The only time a title for me really is a make or break thing in terms of a pitch is if it's genuinely bad, in the sense of if it's overly long, it's really confusing, because that's usually a sign of the actual writing. Like if you're not able to kind of succinctly summarize the point of your story, I don't care if it's the best headline in the world and maybe we'll end up changing it in the actual story, like that's totally fine, but it needs to be succinct. It needs to be telling us, hey, this is what I'm writing and why. So that's something that I always look for. And if it's not doing that, there's 99% of the time the pitch is also going to reflect that, and it's not going to be great. And as a writer, when I'm pitching pieces, it's kind of, I try to use the same mentality where I go in with the understanding that most of the time my title is that I'm gonna pitch is probably gonna end up being changed by the editor down the line, but I'm gonna still try to pitch a title that's as strong as I can, because occasionally it makes it, and no matter what, even if it doesn't, it's still, as I said, is hopefully a good representation of the pitch and then my work that I'll be submitting.
Mm-hmm. Angie, what about you? What's your thought process when you go into creating a title, and how much time do you pour into it, knowing that it might change along the way?
So I have never had a title that hung around. The editors always changed it. So I think that supports Rachel's point of view that, what it is that the title is to catch the eye of the editor, because they have, 100 emails easily, first thing in the morning. And so my title and the subject line can say, okay, read the rest of the pitch, because it is catchy. It states what I'm going to write about. It states the angle that I'm going after. It also states why it's good for that publication, right? So if my title doesn't make sense for the publication, I know I've learned that they're not going to read it, regardless of how long I spent on it, because that's what the title reflects. How long have I spent researching what the publication usually takes?
Mm-hmm. And does the title come to you first? Like, is that something you develop along the way?
It depends. It's like any kind of writing, in terms of what comes first. One of the things that, excuse me, that's really popular, that was my first piece that I ever got, was my title was my mother died without a will and left us a hot financial mess. And that was for Business Insider. Now, that was not the title that actually is on the story, but what it really captured is, there was a financial problem because she didn't leave a will. And what came to mind first in terms of pitching that story was how my mother was this smart woman, right? And intergenerational wealth among African Americans is negligible. And part of it is because, we're not going through the steps of filing a will and having a probate. And so, houses are lost, land is lost, all this kind of thing. So that's where I was coming from I was coming from my own experience, So the title was just something catchy, that I hadn't started there. I'd started with my own experience.
Mm-hmm. So moving on down from the title, I want to talk about the hook of an article. Rachel, how much does a hook factor into your decision making? Do you have to see that hook in the early goings of an article to really consider it?
It depends, and I guess in a way what you mean by a hook, because for me, like the make or break factor for a pitch will be if I know not only a clear idea of what they want to write about, but kind of as Angie kind of talked a little bit about earlier, like why they think it's a good fit for my site. So it shows that, they've done their research, that they know they're not pitching something that could be a strong article, but just is not a fit for Hello Giggles, for instance, like something that I'm like, this could be great if it was written in the New Yorker, but like we have very different readerships, we have very different voices. Like that's not, it doesn't matter if it's a strong article, if it's not a good fit. So if I hook, for me, it's really like, if you're able to summarize exactly the topic you're writing about in a sentence or so, another sentence or so, maybe telling me, why you think this is a good fit for us and what about it is like I said, is a good fit that really feels like it captures our voice or our audience or topics we cover. And then maybe another sentence or so that's telling us this is how you'll go about doing it. That's really what I need to see. It's not about as much like, oh, wow, absolutely the most compelling first line ever, because a lot of times that'll come in the writing itself, or just, I know that there's enough good info there because I can get a really good sense of, okay, they've done their homework. They have a topic they find is interesting. They know how they're going to go about doing it, and they know why it should come to us and not just any other outlet out there.
Mm-hmm. And Angie, when you're writing your articles, with that focus on getting readers interested really early on, how do you approach, again, to use the word hook, how do you approach hooking them early on in your, there's all these tactics they talk, we can ask a question, you can present interesting facts. How do you approach getting readers to stick in your article?
Well, it's like I'm a foodie, and I tell people all the time the way I hook people is through food, because that's a really easy one, because everybody has to eat. And so I think of something that tastes good, You know, I mean, that's an analogy, right? So what would taste good when it comes to talking about something as boring as wills, you know? And what would taste good is, you know, you're losing money, you know, if you don't do this. So that was my hook, is that, you know, we lost money. Here's a way not to do that, you know?
Mm-hmm. And is that something you're thinking about right from the start, or does it kind of just develop as you're writing the piece?
No, that definitely developed as I was writing the piece, because again, my entry into the topic was, this is what happened to me, right? So, you know, you have to get it off the personal and make it, well, how would it be worthwhile to the reader, right? And so that's when the switch came.
So Angie, I want to dig into the writing process a bit more. At what point you have your idea, at what point in having that idea do you start writing? Do you research first? Do you outline it first? Or do you just kind of dig right in and see where it goes?
Yeah, I'm a pantser. So, you know, I just start writing. And once I get a significant chunk, in fact, one of the writing groups that I love actually call themselves the chunks, you know, because after you get a nice chunk, then I start talking it through with my writing group. And they'll say, well, you're missing this. Well, you know, I'd be interested in this. And that's when I go and answer those questions that they gave me. And most of the time, you know, I have a nerd on my writing group team who's really useful, who said, you know, ask for research, ask for data. Then I have somebody who says, you know, it made me cry, and I don't want to read anything that, you know, makes me cry. So you need to come off the personal a little bit and have it more objective, you know. So it's all those kind of things. It's really, you know, they have this myth that writing is this solitary project, you know, in a tower. And really, it's more an exchange of ideas, especially for article writing. So I really encourage people to have a sample set of readers, you know, that they can go to and start that exchange with a group, that thought process, because it rarely happens alone, at least not for me.
Rachel, what about you from a writing standpoint? Do you research ahead of time in the pantser versus planner spectrum? Where do you fall?
I'd say somewhere in between. It definitely depends on the story. Like, I think I've learned this from, you know, from experience, you know, from trial and error, where there have been, for instance, times where I've thought I've had a super strong pitch, and I'm like, oh yeah, like this is a really good story. I know I can write this well. And I'll pitch it without doing some of the research that I probably should have, that I kind of in my mind going, oh, I'll be able to do that later on. And then realizing, wait, this pitch didn't actually get approved, didn't work, because understandably the editor has been like, let's make sure we can back this up first. Like, it's a good claim, but like, you know, do we actually have that info? Like, are we going to be able to make a story out of that? And then, you know, when I've done that research afterwards, I've gone, well, actually, maybe not. And that's something that I could have, you know, saved myself the hassle if I had done a little bit more work beforehand. So I think it really depends, where there are definitely times I've learned from experiences like that to do some more planning in advance and really think about, like, okay, you know, how will I approach this? I don't have to have every bit of research done or every interview conducted or anything like that, but at least know, like, what sources am I going to look at? You know, am I going to bring in personal anecdotes? Am I going to bring in interviews? Whatever it might be, just to get an idea of that. But then there are other times where I've just gone straight in, and then once I have what I have written, I'll take a step back from then and be like, okay, is it missing something crucial that, you know, before I send it anywhere, obviously let me make sure that it has all the components it needs.
Mm-hmm. And you've both touched on this, so I want to get into it now. The factor of research, when you factor in research to the preparation of writing an article. Rachel, what kind of research do you do when you're writing an article? Is it just all fact checking, or what? You know, you mentioned interviews and backing stuff up, but what's your research process like?
So it's a mix, but I think a lot of the stuff that I do is largely interview based, whether it's whether the story I'm writing is meant to be just an interview, where of course I'm going to have to be doing research on the person that I'm interviewing and, you know, be featuring a lot of quotes from them and potentially other sources too, talking about that person, you know, providing some other background details. But other times, if I'm writing, you know, a trend piece, or I'm writing, you know, a personal essay, the research I'm doing might be, as much as it could be as personal as like looking through my own photos and reading conversations and things, if it's a really personal essay or something, or I want to get back to like a mindset I had at a certain time, or talking to people who are in my life at different moments. Or it could be, if it's like a trend piece or something, I might do some actual research on whatever the topic it is that I'm talking about, I did an article for the New York Times in April or May that was about pickleball becoming the perfect pandemic pastime, was the headline they went with, which, speaking of headlines earlier, a great headline that they chose. And that was one that for the research, I didn't do a ton in advance, but I did enough to kind of look around, even just on Twitter, to be like, I know I'm writing, I want to pitch this piece because I'm playing pickleball during the pandemic. I've had friends who are, I'm thinking this is like a fun activity now. I'm noticing a trend, but can I back that up really? Is that actually something that's going on? So I looked on Twitter just to even search pickleball and see like, oh wait, there actually have been a ton of people talking about how much they love playing right now. And then I looked at some of the pickleball association websites to get some stats on, like, I realized I found that it was the fastest growing sport in America. And I was like, well, that backs up my argument. Like things like that I didn't have to do all of it ahead of time, but enough to be like, okay, this is something I can clearly base an article off of and is going to be useful for me down the line.
I read that piece. That was really cool.
Oh, thank you.
Because I would never play pickleball, had no idea what it was, but it was really
most people don't. Most people played it in gym class maybe in high school and then forgot about it for many years. It's fun though. I highly recommend.
So Angie, in terms of your research, what does your research look like when you start getting into backing up a piece? Where do you turn to, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, so most of my, it goes back to the outlet I'm pitching towards, and most of my stuff is business and technology because I studied that before I went into writing. So I'm all about data, so it's, heavy research, call the librarian back in the day, find that technical paper and go through it to, get the actual numbers, maybe a graph, things like that. So that's where I work, but I think what we're saying is that the research depends on the piece, on the publication. It's like all connected.
Mm-hmm. So Rachel, I want to go back to something you mentioned. So when you send off a piece, is it already airtight, factually, all the research is done, or do you just pitch the piece and then indicate this is where you're going to do some research?
More the latter. I think, like I said before, that example of the one that didn't end up, getting picked up because they didn't do it. I definitely make sure that I've done enough to be able to again, have a piece that's worth writing, and that there's not going to be like, this just isn't the case, or we can't prove this, or whatever it might be. Like I do the basic research I need to do, and I might make a list for myself. Like if I know I want to write, I did a piece for Hello Giggles a couple months ago about working with a life coach, which I had done for a couple sessions, and why it was actually for me more beneficial than going to therapy. And I knew that for that piece, I was going to talk to the life coach that I had worked with. I was going to talk to 2 other life coaches just to get some other opinions. And I was going to try to talk to someone else who had that experience and someone who was a therapist to kind of compare the differences there. And I didn't conduct those interviews in advance, and I didn't set them up or anything, but I did make a note to myself and then included it in this case, I wasn't pitching since it was for my own site, but I included that knowledge for myself of going, okay, these are the kinds of people I'm going to be reaching out to. So I could have that so I have that awareness as when I start writing to really be able to back it up and say, this is what I'm going to need. And then I was able to do the work, once I started writing, I did reach out for those interviews to actually set them up.
Mm-hmm. And Angie, how much attention do you pay to the structure of an article? Do you try to build it a certain way, like making sure certain paragraphs do certain things, or is it just kind of free form and the structure doesn't matter so much?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I let the subject matter suggest the structure. So I think, again, when I get that chunk, that is another place that reveals what the structure should be. So I have done Q&A when I'm interviewing somebody and the interview is so long and it's such good information. It's like, what, instead of me trying to weave it through, let me just do Q&A, or when the data, like I did this piece on, and they directed this, they gave me this publication gave me the structure. They said it was going to be 7 things that African-American women should ask their OB-GYN, right? So it's like, okay, so it's 7 things, right? So then the structure became, what's the most important, prioritizing them. But, it's like you, after you get a feel, like Rachel says about how she's going to, know that she's going to talk to therapists, know she's going to talk to coaches, that kind of suggests a structure. You try that out, you play with it, and then maybe it sticks, maybe not. Maybe there's a big hole in here where you have to go fill it with something else. So it's a process, which I hate when I was a student, people saying, well, it's a process, but it is, it's a process.
And Rachel,
True.
both from the editing and the writing standpoint, like particularly with Hello Giggles, do you have a structure to all the articles that everything pretty much has to follow? Or is it also, again, is it free form? Is it kind of just whatever the subject is, they can do what they want?
Yeah, I think it definitely leans more towards freeform, where we go, we feature a lot of different structures on the site. I would say, there are definitely structures that we gravitate towards. Like we do, again, a lot of roundups, just because we're a site that does also a lot of, commerce content, a lot of beauty, fashion and beauty stories in particular. So a lot of our content just makes sense to be in a form where it's, a couple paragraphs and then breaking down product by product. But in stuff that's not, based around that as much, like, it really varies. Again, like I was saying earlier, we do some that are straight personal essays that are written just in a regular essay format. We do things that are interviews or features that have we do a lot of, especially lifestyle features that are written through as features and have quotes from sources weaved in. So they're not as direct interviews, not as Q&As, but they'll have those quotes come in there. But it really varies. Like even as Angie was saying before about like an interview becoming a Q&A format, there have been times, where majority of our interviews we do as we do them as write-throughs where it's not a Q&A, but occasionally we'll have someone where the writer who's conducting the interview will pitch it and say, hey, like, I really think that we had such a good flow of the conversation where we went question, like it really works that we publish them. And it's not, I would say that's not the majority of our interviews at all, but we do it when it works and we just kind of feel it out on a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about getting ideas that you write articles about. So Angie, we get ideas all the time as writers, but where do these ideas come from? What makes you see an idea and say, that's the one I want to write about? That's the one that I can pitch somewhere and get it published. What makes an idea stick out to you?
Okay, so that's two different things, right? One is what's the idea I want to write about. Okay, and so I keep all those. When I saw in Toni Morrison's movie that she had sticky notes in the car, I was like, oh, that's a good idea, because, when I'm driving, I often get ideas. So now I can just, at the red light, write it down as an idea. But when it comes to, pitching, that's different because, again, I have to say, where am I going to pitch this? And so then you have to use an idea that would fit that publication. So that's kind of the difference between article writing and any other kind of writing. When I write for me, basically. And then it's more like, well, what are the characters telling me? And whether, where is the best location to set this? And it's much more playful. But article writing, the audience is the publication. So it has to fit that. And so if I can't make the idea fit a publication I know about, the first thing is I do is because I'm sure that there is a publication, but the other thing that I know is it's better if I pitch to a publication I read, right? As opposed to just anybody, because I've learned that they can tell that you really don't know them, so it's also like, going up to a person on the street and saying, hi, let's have coffee. And it's like, well, who are you? And why would I want to do that? But because you don't know them, they're strangers. And so the first rule when it comes to pitching is knowing the publication. And then you can get your idea to fit them, because they don't really want strangers. Although on the same time, they don't mind strangers, because right now they know a lot of publications are aware that they've been depending on, I'll put it that way, just a few voices, and those voices are usually white and, not ethnically or income-wise diverse or any of those kind of things. So they are looking, the good news is they are looking for more strangers now, but even then, they're not going to change the whole goal of the publication or the point of view of the publication just to get more Black people in, or more Latinos in. So, you still have to fit that. But I'm not saying don't pitch those people, don't talk to them, but know, who you're pitching to. Don't go, make yourself friendly. That's what I say, friendly, but not pushy.
That's a great way of putting it. I think that just jumping in for a moment, just say that, when I receive pitches, that's the thing, just like what Angie was saying, where we're always open to having new voices on the site. We want to have more voices on the site. I think, every outlet is a little different, but I would say that's vast majority is nothing wrong with coming from strangers, as Angie put it, but it's about strangers who've done their homework. They've done their reading, whether they're actually already genuine readers of the site, or they're really good at pretending because they spent a couple hours digging into it, and that's fine. As long as you did your enough research to say, hey, I make sure that this angle, this story is appropriate for you because it has a similar voice, it has a similar tone, it has an angle that would be a fit for your content. Then I don't care whether that's if it's strong enough. I don't care whether it's a person I've worked with 30 times or never, or if they have a million credits to their name, or if they've never written it again. As long as it's a strong pitch where I get a good sense of the writing, and it sounds like they have done their homework, where they're not pitching to me or 50 other people without changing a word. And you really just got to make sure that you could have a strong idea, but if you can't just pitch the same idea to every single outlet and assume that, well, one of them will take it. If it doesn't, it's not going to work for every single outlet without some changes being made. So you got to make sure you take that step back and really do your research and think about how it will fit into that particular outlet.
And that's not to say that a pitch won't fit multiple outlets, but you have to like the angle. So, if you're writing about parks, for example, you can definitely look to an outdoor magazine, right? But you can also look to the fact that there's been a story about how, the park rangers are aging. So young people, we need to get more young people to, be into the career, so it's looking at it from a certain way to make it appeal to the publication.
So Angie, you said something earlier that I wanted to go back to, but so if you have an idea that you really want to write about, but you don't know where you would send it, do you still write it, or do you kind of put it to the side until you think of somewhere you could send it?
Yes, and this is my greatest story. I'm so glad you asked, Josh, because I wrote about, we lived in West Africa, my husband and I, just when we got married. And that was the first time I realized I was an American as opposed to just a Black person. I wrote that piece 10 years ago. It finally found a home. It's going to run in the Rumpus in a couple of weeks. So yeah, part of the joy of being a writer is writing. So I wrote it. I didn't know where it would go. I sent it out to lots of publications that I thought would want it. I modified it here, shortened it there, all the kind of stuff. Nobody took it. It's still there, and here somebody finally took it. So no, I definitely write it anyway, because I feel like I'm kind of mystical that way, that I feel like ideas come to me because they're coming to me. So it's my responsibility to respect that idea and work on it without thinking about, well, what's it going to do? The outcome. Yeah. To write without worrying about the outcome. Because that's especially true when I tell the students too, and if any of my students are in here, they'll know, writing is an art. Publishing is a business, right? So you should write because it's your art, not because you're looking for business. I mean, business will come. Do your art. It makes you happy. That's why you're doing it. At least it makes me happy and much saner. And boy, we need sanity these days.
Rachel, is it similar for you when you're writing something? Do you just write it and then worry about where it's going to go afterwards?
I actually don't most of the time. I think obviously both ways are totally valid. I know plenty of writers who do what Angie does and write straight out. And I think that's I almost wish I did that more. I think because I understand absolutely all the benefits of it. For me, I think I tend to just pitch. I tend to get the pitch together and pitch more. And then if it doesn't work, if the pitch is just not finding a home, by then I usually also have a good sense for myself of was it an important enough pitch for me to keep trying, or am I what, it didn't work in these 2 or 3 places. Sure, I could keep going, try to find 4 or 5 more, but if I'm not passionate, that's usually a good sign where I'm and it wouldn't have been worth me even probably writing out anyway. If I'm okay, this is fine. Occasionally there will be something where I will just write straight out. I had a personal essay also for the Times actually that I read at the beginning of this year that was for their ties section. That was about my parents and their use of Amazon's Alexa and how they played, just watch getting a little window into their marriage by the way that they, played Jeopardy every night through Amazon's Alexa. And that was one of the rare instances for me where I actually just sat down, wrote the piece out, and then pitched it to that section and ended up, working out luckily the first time. And it's a piece I would say I'm very proud of, but like, that's a rare instance for me. I typically pitch first and then only write later. But it's also I will add just also because I do a lot of my own writing of not art, things that are not pitching. Like I'm working on a novel right now. I'm trying to do a lot. So a lot of the times, like I'll use that as my creative outlet in a way of just being able to write. And as Angie said, stay sane and do all that. And then the other stuff is bonuses on top.
So one question I often ask is, should you pay attention to trends in publishing when you're writing? And the answer I almost always get is no, you write what you want to write. But I wonder if article writing is different, right? So do you recommend studying trends, seeing what's going on and writing towards that trend?
It depends. I think trends in publishing, I mean, if you mean more like, again, are people not publishing personal essays as much anymore? Or gee, like, does everyone want to see Q&As? Like, I think to an extent, I think it's really based though, again, on that specific outlet. Like there's always going to be a home for pretty much all that kind of writing. So maybe, certain outlets aren't publishing that many op-eds as they used to, or for, random example, but that doesn't mean your op-ed can't find a home somewhere else. So I would say definitely not paying too much attention to that overall. As we talked about earlier, yes, pay attention to that specific outlet to make sure that like, if they haven't run a personal essay in 5 years, like what do you do? Don't pitch it there, like be trying to do your research there. But I would say in terms of paying attention though to trends like of what's going on in the world and basing your writing off things that are going to be timely and relevant and, are things that not just going, oh, this is a cool idea, but realizing like it's not what people are talking about right now. It's not what's on everyone's minds. That I know that's kind of a different type of trend, but that's the stuff I would say is really worth paying attention to.
Yeah. And that was the trend I was sort of referring to, was this knowing what's going on in the world and picking out subjects from there to write about. Angie, is that something you do? Do you follow what's going on in the world and sort of pick out from there? Or do you just go wherever your ideas take you?
Oh no, I'm a junkie when it comes to knowing what's going on in the world. But I also know that what brings me joy in terms of writing are certain themes, right? So I kind of stick to my metal for that. And, that has to do with Black women and poverty and, money and business and technology and education. And so that's, where I stay, because that's what I pay attention to. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, when something's a trend, it's been defined a trend, and so it's probably over. Instead, I just stay in the fields I like to read about, because that's the other thing, we tell our students, read widely, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really cool to read widely, but of course, I'm only going to read what I really like, so, or what I'm interested in. And, and it's like, the other thing we talk about is like, it's some kind of conversation, right? So I'm reading and I'm like, I have this idea because this person missed this point. I should go ahead and tell them, right? And that's an article. Where can I pitch it? All the time. So
I think just going off for a moment, like what Angie said is that it's not that you should be inserting yourself into every conversation just because it's a conversation, just because you're noticing a trend. Like if you don't have something new to offer there, don't force it. That's a lot of writers try to do that and say, oh, everyone's talking about work from home life right now, for instance. Like there are plenty of people who have important good things to say about that, but if you don't have an angle that feels new or refreshing in any way, like it doesn't mean you have to be writing about that trend. But I think the thing to really keep in mind is making sure that if there is something that is on everyone's minds, or that is kind of the overall topic right now, like for instance with the pandemic, you want to make sure if you're pitching something during the pandemic, you want to make sure that if it's not related to that specifically, that's fine, but that it should be something that doesn't feel out of touch. It doesn't feel tone deaf, where it's like, or just irrelevant, where it's, you're not going to be writing a list of, the 40 best travel destinations in Europe right now for whatever thing, and people are going to be like, now maybe, yeah, Europe, you pitch that and go great. Yeah. But it's like, so it's, I think paying attention to the trends to enough to inform what you're writing. And it doesn't mean, again, you have to write on that trend. You could write a travel piece right now if you wanted to, but it should be travel reflecting what's going on in the world, or something, a specific part of what's happening that is still worth reading. And it doesn't have to be dark and depressing and being like, you can't do this right now, but it can be interesting, but it should absolutely still be a reflection of what is happening in the world.
Mm-hmm. And you both touched on this already, but I want to talk about timeliness with articles, and especially when you're writing an article, that's got a short shelf life. If something happened, you want to write about it, that article is only marketable for a certain amount of time. So I guess, Angie, from that point of view, what's your experience, A, with pitching timely articles? And B, I assume that's not an article you would write. Would you just pitch it on concept? Because it gets pretty hard to write timely articles not knowing if it's going to go anywhere, and then just having this article that you can never do anything with.
Well, so that's why, I just write. Because if I kept thinking about, is this timely? Is this not timely? I go crazy. I just do what I do and then see. And then, but the other, in terms of timely, the other thing that happens, which is really great, is that the editor might see something in your pitch, right? And so they'll say, well, this is really good, but can you come at it from this way? And that's part of that homework thing and part of that friend, where you go up and you talk to them and they're like, yeah, it's nice to meet you. This sounds good, but, if you come at it this way, we'll take it, or something like that. So, it's not, I feel like before I started doing this, I should say often or regularly, that's the word I'm looking at. I thought that, oh my God, this editor is going to, say no and ruin my life and talk about how horrible my writing is and all that kind of stuff. And the editors are partners. They want, like Rachel said, they want more content. They want more content from different voices. They want content, though, that fits their publication. They want to work with somebody who's a professional and has done their homework. They're not these big, evil, Dr. Knows or whatever. So, I put myself out there and see what happens, without necessarily saying it has to be by being flexible. That's the other thing, because I know a lot of people will say, well, I pitched it this way. This is it. This is the way it's going to be. And it's like, that's not going to get you published, because, it's not my way or the highway here. It's a relationship. It's a partnership. And if you work with that partnership, it's a win. It really is a win-win, because the editors see stuff and they change stuff, and it just makes it really does make it better.
Mm-hmm. So Rachel, speaking on that from the editor's side, if you see an article come through in the submissions that maybe the timeliness has sort of faded, maybe it's like a week or so behind, how willing are you to work with the writer to make that more relevant to modern time?
Honestly, to be totally honest, not much, because I think that as that writer, unless it's my fault and I just missed it in my inbox or something, which obviously that's on me then, but if it's that the writer hasn't taken the time to say, okay, I understand that I'm a little late to the game here. How can I alter this pitch in some way to be relevant now? Like, what can I do to make it different? Then that's what every writer, that's what I do when I'm writing my pitches. I'm sure that's what Angie does. That's what so many people do, where, you just say, okay, maybe my original pitch, isn't going to work anymore. Something changed, something in the world changed, something in what I wanted to, whatever it might be, then that's fine. And that sucks to have to do that for a moment, but then you take a step back and you recalibrate. You figure out, okay, how can I pitch this differently so that it is relevant? Or if you really need to, it's unfortunately, you might have just tossed it aside and say, this one's just not going to work right now. It would have been great if it did, but it didn't. I'll move on to the next one. Because as the editor, if I'm getting a pitch that is just clearly not going to be important right now, or is not going to work right now, I'm not going to care that much if the pitch is well written, because it's like, well, why didn't you make it relevant, or why didn't you realize that this wasn't a good fit? So I think that's on the writer to really be thinking about that with themselves, and not be putting also so much weight in any one pitch that if it didn't work, it didn't get rejected, it's disappointing, of course, but then, you go to your next idea, you move on. And that's just the business, as Angie said earlier, that's the business of publishing, where you got to be proud of your writing and excited about it, but understand that not everything's going to work, and that you have to kind of, think on the spot and make some adjustments.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about the process of submitting and pitching articles. So Angie, when you have an article that you want to pitch, do you send the pitch to a bunch of places at once? Or you do one at a time? I mean, let's assume that you know all the places you want to send it to. You're familiar with their style. Do you send it to everybody at once, or do you sort of tier it? So you say, I'll send it to these people. If nobody here, I see you shaking your head, so I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. No, I definitely send it out to about half a dozen places, because I really think that if I'm trying to send it to more than half a dozen, then it's not really targeted, right? And that's the whole point, is to target it to places that would really take it. And if nobody takes it, then I look at the pitch again and say, okay, what didn't I include, or what, did I miss, or, so it's not a tier so much as back to that fit, right? So that's what I do. And then sometimes, like I said, I just write anyway and put it, in the drawer, because it's in my head for something. And, eventually I have, I actually, though I've been writing long enough now so that it's been borne out, that eventually, it comes back. And it's like, oh yeah, I was thinking about that a while ago. I should go pull that out and, revisit it,
Mm-hmm. Rachel, is it a similar process for you when you go about submitting your work to places? Do you sort of have a few in mind and send it to all of them?
I tend, just because my stuff tends not to be as time sensitive or as news based, that I tend to send to really one at a time, because I think, at least, and obviously people might disagree, for me personally, that's kind of been my general rule of, if it's something that's really time sensitive and news oriented, then I think it's fine absolutely to send to a couple different places, because people understand, editors understand, you're trying to get this out there right away for a purpose, so that you can't wait around for everyone to check their individual inboxes. But if it's something that doesn't have that time sensitive nature to it, then I tend to send for one at a time. And then, if I get a no from that one, or if I follow it up and I don't hear from them and just assume that's a no from there, then I'll move on to the second one. So I probably total, though, if I'm getting more than 2 or 3 rejections, that tends to be where I'll stop. And again, as Angie said, either take that look and see, what am I missing in this pitch? Like, is there something here that I could change? Is there something I could strengthen? Or I go, this one's just not working. And if I'm passionate about writing it in some way, I could write it for myself or keep trying. But more likely than not, I'm going, by that point, kind of the fire has died a little bit, where I'm like, you know what, that's okay, I'll move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. So we've covered a lot of this throughout the episode, but I do want to just get your take on what makes a great pitch, because we're getting a lot of questions about that. Like, when you go to pitch something, what are some things you have to make sure that you include? And we'll start with Angie, start with that. When you go to write your pitch, what are some of the main things? Like, do you have a checklist of things I have to mention, these kinds of things, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, I have a checklist. Because the other thing is, I can't make a pitch too long. So I basically answer 3 questions, or, 3 questions. This is what I want to talk about. This is why it's good for you. And this is why I'm the writer to write it. That's it.
I like that.
That's all you need. That's perfect. That's all you need to see.
Yeah, that's it.
So Rachel, from the editorial side, you see a lot of pitches, I'm sure. What makes the good one stand out from the mediocre or the bad one? Is it just conciseness? What is it that you're looking for?
Conciseness is huge. I think, as Angie just said, like, those 3 elements are key. And that if a pitch has those 3, that's what I want. Again, I want to see, what are they writing about? Can they say it clearly and succinctly and say, this is the topic I'm writing about, this is the angle I want to take on that topic. Are they making it clear also why they think it's a good fit for my outlet in particular, like whether that's part of the voice or the demographic or people they'll talk to or whatever it might be, and how they'll go about doing it. And I guess, and why it's a good fit for the outlet, it goes almost hand in hand in my mind with, why are you the person to write it? Because it could be like, I'm writing about it for Hello Giggles. We do, so much, that's our audience is really millennial women, majority of them. And so if you're writing as a millennial woman and saying, hey, like, I've seen this trend among my friends, I've seen this happen, this is a company, this is the brand everyone my age is following, or whatever it might be, if you can add some authority there and say, this is why I'm the person to write it, and this is also how it fits with your audience, that goes hand in hand in my mind. So if you can, again, say it concisely, say what you're writing with your angle, why you're the person to write it, why it's a fit for my outlet, and if there's anything we need to know about how you're going to go about doing it, if it's something that would just be essential information. Again, like if you're like, this is going to be a really interview heavy feature where I'm going to speak to experts, I'm going to use anecdotes from people, I want to make it a photo essay or whatever, something where it's telling us that, but keeping it no more than a couple sentences. Because what I always tell my students and also other writers who ask is that as long as you're giving that basic info, that's really what you need. Because if you do that clearly enough, the editor should have all the info they need to be able to approve it or not. And if they really want to know more, they can send a follow-up. Like if they're interested, if you say in that original email, hey, I'm going to interview a psychologist on this subject, and the editor is interested, you don't need to tell them, I'm going to interview this specific person and talk to them about these 6 topics or whatever. If the editor really wants to, they can follow up and be like, okay, if you interview experts, what do you plan to discuss, or how many people are you going to include? Like, they can get that information from you afterwards, as long as you give them the overall summary that they'll need going in.
Mm-hmm. So I have so many more questions, but we have to get into audience questions now. So I want to start this one. Angie, this question is for you. What tips do you have for getting through imposter syndrome and feeling that you don't need permission to write, or learning to write for yourself, as you've mentioned?
Ooh. So for me, it's just being old. I mean, I've had a lot of different careers, and I was fired from most of them. And so it was like, okay, maybe I should really do what I love, which is writing. And so far, that's worked out. So I shouldn't say old, more like maturity and experience type of thing. And the other thing is, in terms of imposter syndrome, that reading widely stuff, right? So you read some other stuff and it's like, I could do that, or this is crap, or how did this get published? And it's like, well, if you really think that, then you should put yourself out there. That's the answer.
Rachel, what about you? Anything to add to that?
I think that's a great point that Angie just made about reading. I think one thing I do that, definitely I agree with that, and saying, hey, if you feel like something's not being done right, or you could do it better, do it. Just, prove it to yourself, prove it to others. I think the main thing is like recognizing that everyone, especially writers, deal with some form of imposter syndrome. And that's like, I've definitely personally dealt, like, I've often been the youngest person on a team. I look young to begin with. Those people will think I'm younger than I am, even if I'm like, no, I'm qualified to be here, that kind of thing, where it gets in your head. Like, those get to you, and everyone has some version of that. If it's, where I think it's letting yourself acknowledge that insecurity, acknowledge that fear, saying it's normal, it's okay, like, that's fine. And then not dwelling in it though, and moving past it, and then reminding yourself of why you're in that room in the first place, and saying, if you're writing something and you're going, or if you're trying to pitch something to an outlet and going, oh my God, I don't know if they're going to take me there. The New York Magazine, they never would take me. I haven't written there. Like, you're shooting yourself in the foot before you even begin. Tell yourself, you're writing this piece because you think you have what it takes to get in there. Maybe even if you haven't written other places before, even if you don't have a ton of credentials, you still are doing something that most people aren't, which is even bothering to pitch and bothering to say, hey, I want to contribute here. That's already big enough that, like, it's up to them. Yeah, you can't predict whether they're going to take it or not, but not stopping yourself from even getting to that point by scaring yourself away from it and saying it's not worth it, or they're never going to take me. Like, you got to shoot your shot, and not bring yourself down.
Like I said, I've been through a lot of jobs, so I've applied to a lot of jobs, and so I just think of it, this is a job. Okay, great. They don't want me. Let me send my resume to the next one. Send my resume to the next one, and my resume are my ideas. And yeah, you want to tweak your resume for the company, but it's their loss if they don't take me.
I like that. Next question, Rachel, I want to pose to you. Can you change the pitch and send it to the same publication twice?
It would depend how much you're changing it. I think if it's a completely different angle, like if maybe you were going to write a personal essay at one point, and also, I guess it depends both on the pitch and how you changed it, as well as if you had gotten a response from that editor. I think if you got a blanket no, I would say probably it's just not going to work for that outlet. Like, I'm probably not going to take, as an editor, I'm probably not going to take that pitch if I just was like, this isn't going to work, no matter how it's changed. But if, let's say, you would pitch something as a personal essay and I went, this topic's really interesting, but I just don't think this is the way to go about it. Or, I think maybe people will be more interested in hearing not just your story, but bringing other people, and then you pitched it again and saying, hey, I want to write about this topic, but as like a crowdsourced piece about, different people's experiences, maybe including my own, but it's not going to be based around a personal essay. I think I would have to, again, really consider it, but would not rule that out. I think if it's something that, again, is altered with a reason, and that reason isn't just you wanting to get into that outlet.
Mm-hmm. So, Rachel, I want to pose this next question to you as well. When an article is time sensitive and you're pitching it, how long do you wait for a response from a place before you start sending it somewhere else?
For really time sensitive stuff, I would say you don't have to wait more than 24 or 48 hours, again, depending on obviously how time sensitive it is. If it's something that will be not interesting after 24 hours, then yeah, don't wait 2 days, but wait that time. But I think one thing I always note to students is that if you are pitching something really time sensitive, you can note in that email to that, first make sure you note in that subject line that it's urgent, that it's timely, that, that will catch that editor's attention. but also you can note in the email itself saying, hey, because this is time sensitive, I'm going to be sending it to multiple outlets. As long as the editor is aware of that, so they know that, okay, like if I want this, I have to grab it. They'll be able to jump on that, and then it doesn't prevent you as the writer from being able to having to twiddle your thumbs and wait and say like, oh, they rejected it, and by the time they told me no, this whole topic is over. The only thing is to make sure that if you're going to send it to multiple places at once, if it does get accepted somewhere, you let those other places know ASAP that it is taken, or else they're going to come back and say, great, we want it. And then you're going to have to say, sorry, I don't have it anymore. And they're not going to be thrilled about that. So you want to make sure that you're telling them right away, hey, I got this place somewhere else. Thanks for the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So Angie, you've mentioned this a few times about, comparing sending it out to a magazine, like meeting a stranger on the street and being like, let's have coffee. So I person asking about how you approach magazine, and how, within the pitch, you have such limited space to pitch what this article is about. So how do you tailor it to each individual place? Do you add a personal note, like I read your stuff, or how do you work, or how do you tailor it to each individual magazine?
Right. So it's back to, how would you do this for a job? Because that's basically what you're doing, is you're asking for a job. Right. And so you have to be a professional about it. So one of the things with what Rachel just said about saying that it's time sensitive. So you would never, ever, ever, ever put urgent in the subject line if it wasn't really time sensitive, And, I've heard of stories where people did that so they would get their piece read. And that is just totally unprofessional. Right. So in terms of professional, it doesn't take much. That's what you're showing with the fact that you can write concisely. Right. So, a pitch is something you work on. You just don't willy-nilly say, ta-da, I'm done here, and oh, I'm so hurt because you didn't take it. Because, just like you work on a cover letter for a job, you work on this, you tailor it, and then you send it. So I would just use that mindset. I think everybody, on this call has applied for a job before. And I bet you everybody on this call has once had somebody apply to a job in there, and they had to look at it, and they would look at it and they'd say, oh my God, there's a spelling mistake in their cover letter. I mean, come on. You're supposed to be a writer. Or worse, that they spelled my name wrong, or something, or they didn't, you can see that they had cut and paste a new publication in the same thing. I mean, they're not stupid. I mean, they've gotten into the places that they are because they're smart and they work hard, right? So you do the same, respect them, be smart, and work hard on it. It's not like it's a throwaway. Because the other thing is, back to the dating, you really do want a long-term relationship with this editor. I mean, one of the things I was surprised about is after that first pitch, they had, and I didn't know, right? So I'm going to tell you the secret. They had this monthly prompt email that they sent out to writers who had written to them before. So I didn't even have to make up pitches. I just had to respond to their prompts. And it's like, wow, how did I get on this list? Well, I got on this list because they said, okay, she did what she was going to do. Her piece was was on time. She was working well with the editor. And so now we want her in our stable of writers, right? So that I can now go around and not be that newbie, right? And the only way that I did that is because I was treating it like a job and being a professional about it.
Mm-hmm. So kind of a follow-up to that, Angie, I'll ask this question to you as well. If the time comes to look for a new place to pitch articles to, where do you go to look? Do you just Google places? Do you look on a bookshelf? Where do you go to look?
Where are you reading? What are you reading? That's where you want to be. Because if you like the publication enough to subscribe, because that's the other thing, put your money where your mouth is, subscribe to the publication. And it's not just, I want to be in the New York Times. Do you actually read the New York Times? Or do you, or do you click on a Twitter article because it looks interesting? I mean, that's how you know. What are you reading? And those are the places you go to first, because even though you're like, well, I'm reading it, but you're taking in voice, you're taking in content, you're taking in subject matter, you're taking in editorial style. And so if you're reading that and you like it, then probably you like it because you're a fit. It's like, again, the relationship, you just don't, when I say strangers, it's strangers because you haven't met before, but you do have something in common already, or else you wouldn't be reading the publication. And so that's where you go first.
Rachel, next question is for you. When a piece does get picked up, and I think you could offer insight from writer and editor perspective here. When a piece does get picked up, what are the immediate next steps? What's the process? Is there a dialogue with the editor where they ask more questions about where you're going with the piece, or what happens next?
It really depends, and that's definitely for the editor to take the responsibility of. If you pitch them and they're responding saying, "Hey, we want to take this," this is great. It goes in really depends on the article and the outlet, but a lot of the time the editor might then say, "Okay, this is great. Can you have it be in this word count? Can it be delivered on this day? Whatever." And then once you agree to those terms, they might not talk to you again until you submit that piece, and then they might come back, for edits or something afterwards. Sometimes there might be a conversation if they're, something. I do op-eds sometimes for NBC News, and I have worked with my editor there pretty often now. So, we have a little more of a dialogue and back and forth where there'll be times where it's what I said above, where I'll pitch an idea to her. She'll say, "Great, let's do it. Due on this date," and that'll be it until I get back to her. Or it might be she goes, "Great, let's do it," and then an hour later she'll be like, "Oh, did you see this link? That article. Do you mind? You should try to incorporate this in here. I think that would be good to fit." Or she'll be like, "Hey, were you thinking of mentioning this part?" And we'll actually have a back and forth there. I'd say more common is that first experience where they trust that as long as they have the information they need from you and feel certain of what they're going to get, they'll wait until you submit that. But occasionally, if there's something that, again, they need to follow up on because they need you to clarify a few details, or maybe you come to them because you're like, "Hey, I am looking to get a contact here. Do you have any way you can help me get in touch with this source or something?" Editors are definitely happy to have those conversations if needed. It's just up to the editor to tell the writer if they need more, and for the writer to then tell the editor if they need help with making something happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, it definitely with that deadline, that's the first thing is that, they'll come back, word count, deadline. And if for some reason you don't think you can do that, tell them right then.
Yes.
Do not ever, 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 ever miss a deadline, unless somebody's had a car accident or something like that. And in which case, tell them that too. I mean, it's back to just being a professional. It's a job.
Exactly. And just, sorry, no, go ahead.
It's a job.
Yeah, it's just the most important thing you could do is just, again, as Jan said, just be professional where emergencies come up, things happen in your life, or even not even an emergency situation, but let's say you are really trying to incorporate a source for her, there's a source you would love to include in your story, but they're bailing on you. They're not getting back to you or something. Give the editor that heads up, and either they can help you find someone new, or if that's someone they absolutely need to include, give them that alert so that they're not just waiting around and you're, killing time going, "Well, maybe they'll get back to me. Maybe I can figure this out," because there is probably the main thing that would make me as an editor not want to work with a writer again, even if the quality was good, is if they weren't professional and I was bugging them and having to email them and go, "Where's your piece? What's happening? What's the latest here?" It's you as the writer take that responsibility of meeting your deadline. And if you can't for whatever reason, people are we're all human beings. We will understand things happen and we'll try to help. Just tell us early on, and then we will work with you and figure something out.
So I want to get one last question in here, just a general question. If you had to give one piece of advice to people that want to get articles published, what would that piece of advice be? Angie, let's start with you.
Pitch.
I like it. Not even just a one-word answer. All right, Rachel, what about you?
I'll give another one-word answer. Read. Going off what Angie said before, read everything around you. Read all the outlets you're interested in. If you are seeing links, if you take a look at what you're reading, not just the ones that, of course, I subscribe to these 5 outlets, but if you're like, "Hey, I'm always sending my friends links, or every time they get links from them, I'm always clicking on these same places, or I'm always interested in this," read, and you'll know where to pitch, what kind of stuff you like, where your ideas might fit most in line with. It's going to help you so much.
Well, that's all the time we have. Rachel, Angie, thank you both so much for being here. Your insight was very appreciated. And thank you to all of our attendees for being here. We're going to be back next week with Inside Short Memoir. I didn't check beforehand, so double check the website for that, but I believe it's Inside Short Memoir. You can sign up now. Again, this was Inside Writing presented by Gotham Writers. Check us out online, gothamwriters.com, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.